The 6 to 7 Figure Show, episode 55. Let's hit it.
Broadcasting from the Valley of the Sun outside Phoenix, Arizona. This is the 6 to 7 Figure Show. Tired of working so hard and having no time? Take your six-figure practice and turn it to a thriving seven-figure enterprise. And now, your host, author, speaker, mentor, and strategist, Frank Bria.
Hey everyone, welcome to the 6 to 7 Figure Show. I'm your host, Frank Bria, and today we are going to have a special episode, a series of trainings that we are talking about, which are going to be the 12 critical projects that you need to execute in your business in order to hit 100K a month in your service business using a high-ticket program. There's a lot of focus that we spend on the design up front, but we are going to be focusing on one of those projects today. So we're going to cut over to training on one of those projects. And after the training's done, come back, hang with us, and I will give you a way for you to get a copy of some of this training for yourself. And we'll turn it over to there. Hey everyone, Frank Bria here, broadcasting live for the 7th day of 12 of our 12 days of seven figures. This project is one like people get really nervous about. And when we get into this with companies that we work with, things get real. And we're talking about your financial systems today. So this has to get done somewhere along the way. It's not necessarily the first thing we have to tackle. Sometimes we just have to shore up sales and marketing efforts. But at some point, if you want to grow to seven figures, you need to have financial systems in place. And the purpose of these financial systems is for you to be able to plan and manage growth. That's fundamentally what it is, plan and manage growth. But you also have to ensure you have enough cash for the company to actually execute those plans. And so there are a number of different things that could be in your financial systems, but the two major ones that we work on and you need to have in place in order to get to 100K a month in revenue are the ones that I'm going to teach you today. And they're not the only financial systems that you should have or that you will have in the future. Bigger companies definitely need other financial systems. And it doesn't mean that as you're growing to seven figures, you shouldn't do anything else. But these are two that are very often left out, and the importance is super, super critical. So let's talk about the first one, your cash flow plan. All right, what is a cash flow plan? A cash flow plan is a week-over-week view of incoming and outflowing cash in your business. That's different than revenue. That's different than expenses. This is literally when the money arrives and when it goes out. And the reason why, I mean, you have probably seen in your own business why cash flow is so important. You get a sale and you have to wait a couple of days till the money actually shows up in your bank account. That's a definition of where revenue and cash flow differ. So if you've got nothing today, week over week may be jumping too far. Monthly is fine. But most growing companies need to manage cash on a weekly basis until you get to a point where last month's revenues are covering this month's expenses. Okay. So that's kind of your trigger where you know you're not managing cash on a weekly basis anymore. If you have enough in the bank from last month to cover everything you have to pay this month, then you can start to manage cash flow on a monthly basis. And again, it's better than nothing, but until then, you're best to manage cash flow week over week. Now, it's important to understand the difference between revenue and cash flow. So if you're selling high ticket programs that have payment plans, then you need to account for those. You have to plan out when the cash is actually going to arrive. That's basically so you don't spend more quickly than the cash comes in. Also, on the flip side, if you charge an upfront fee for a program that runs over multiple months, you also need to allocate out that cash over the course of the program so that your costs of delivery are covered. A big mistake that a lot of entrepreneurs make is they just plan to sell more later to cover the expenses. So I'm just going to sell a bunch of stuff, charge upfront fees now. I'm going to spend all the cash and then but don't worry about it. I'll sell later to cover the expenses. That's a mistake. Don't plan for that. Okay. As you project cash into the future, you're going to have to create an estimate of the incoming cash based on your sales efforts. That means if you've got a cash flow plan, it's probably going to be a formula that runs based on the amount of sales and marketing efforts you do when the cash is going to come in. Keep in mind that you want these estimates to be conservative. Cash flow planning is not the time and place for you to put up your amazing, awesome, unreasonable goals. This is not what you should do there, okay? So you can think of a cash flow plan as basically a spreadsheet, a week-over-week spreadsheet over the next, say, 6 months or so that you know when cash is coming in, okay? Now, here are some things that need to be included in your cash flow plan or you need to consider. First, estimate the percentage of new customers that are going to pay in full or that'll be on payment plans, okay? So that when you think about your sales efforts, you know when the cash is coming in, some up front, some over time. Now, if you have multiple payment plans, like if you have a 3-pay and a 4-pay and a 6-pay, that's going to make this very difficult for you. So to get started, just use the worst case scenario. If you have a 3, 4, and a 6-pay plan, just assume everyone's on the 6-pay plan. If the cash comes in faster, better off for you, but plan for the worst case scenario. 2, track fixed expenses differently than marginal expenses. Now, let me explain the difference here. Marginal expenses are the costs that come up by adding additional customers to your portfolio. So, for example, let's say you do an onboarding call with people at the beginning of your program, or let's say you have a done-for-you service that you execute for your customers. Those costs are all marginal because they're added only when a customer comes on board. Let's say you have a salary that you pay a coach. That's a fixed expense because it doesn't matter if you have customers or not, you have to pay the bill. Now, if your coach is paid per customer, again, you're back to marginal again. So make sure that as you put your cash flow plan together, your marginal expenses are going to grow with your growth. Okay, they grow with sales. Don't just flatline all your expenses while revenue goes up. That's not how business works. 3, include a certain percentage of revenue to go for sales and marketing. If you don't know how much you're spending to acquire a customer, then a good estimate would be 20% for sales, 20% for marketing expenses and 10% for commission if you have a salesperson. If you're doing all the sales, then you can include that elsewhere, and I'll explain where that is later. But these expenses will grow as your revenue does. So make sure that you have that included. And remember that often these expenses are paid long before the revenue comes in, especially if you have payment plans. So make sure you adjust for that timing in your cash flow plan. 4, include the possibility of customers defaulting on payment plans or not renewing. A certain percentage of your customers are not going to pay you when they should and as they should. So make sure that your cash flow plan considers that, because if you just assume everyone's going to renew and everyone's going to pay their payments, your cash flow plan will not be realistic. Number 5, include paying yourself in your cash flow plan. Now, some salary should at least be attributed to you. Now, granted, you're going to be drawing from profits as well, but you should have a minimum salary. If you're performing customer-facing services and you'd need to be replaced by someone if you decided to leave, then include that portion of your salary as marginal expenses. That anything else that's just paying you to run the business should be considered an owner's salary. And the draw will come out of profits. We don't have to worry about that in a cash flow plan. Definitely, though, plan for some salary. 6, calculate your break even. How much do you have to sell in order for everything, including your salary, to be paid? Make sure your sales and marketing plans exceed that break even point. So if you have to have 10 customers a month, make sure you have a plan to get at least 10 customers a month. Obviously, break even is not where you want to be. You want to make a profit. But if you don't know where that break even point is, then you're basically flying blind. All right, once your cash flow plan has been created, you're going to use it to calculate that minimum sales target. And you create sales and marketing plan from those numbers. Now, notice that most entrepreneurs don't do it that way. Most entrepreneurs will create a sales and marketing plan first without knowing any of the cash flow plan. Now, if you don't know your break even and you don't know what your total marginal expense loads are, you don't aren't going to know. You're not going to know if your sales are going to make you profitable or not. You're just guessing. And a lot of people guess wrong. They think they did great and the money is gone at the end of the month. Have you ever experienced that before? That's fixed with a cash flow plan. Okay. Now, at the beginning, your cash flow may not be positive. You may be spending more than you're taking in. If that's the case, here are some things you can do to fix it. Number one, increase sales. So can you sell more, knowing that your sales and marketing expenses and marginal expenses are also going to go up? So use your spreadsheet to model that out. If I sell more, can I fix the cash flow problem? Two, decrease fixed expenses. Now, this is why we break expenses into different categories, fixed and marginal. If you're trying to fix a cash flow problem, you're going to try to fix it in the fixed expenses category. Now, we focus on that category because if you decrease marginal expenses, generally that tends to degrade service and is not going to be a good place for you to be from a business perspective. So cash flow is generally a short-term problem, and you can usually grow out of it, but that's by adjusting your fixed expenses. Now, if all else fails and you're cash flow negative and you have to put cash into your own business to keep it afloat, make sure the problem is with the fixed expenses, okay? You make sure that you can adjust those things, reduce the fixed expenses, because if you can't generate positive cash flow because of your marginal expenses, you're in trouble. You're never going to be able to solve that problem. You'll never be able to grow out of a cash flow problem, okay? If the issue is fixed expenses, then eventually as you sell more, you'll solve the problem. But you have to make sure that that's where the problem is. If you have a problem getting cash flow positive because of your marginal expenses, your pricing is off or your business model is wrong. All right, that's a cash flow plan. Let's talk about the second one. The second one is a budget. All right, let's talk about what a budget is and how you should use it as an entrepreneur. Go through your fixed and marginal expenses and categorize the spending. You're going to use your cash flow plan as a guide, but you don't have to categorize the spending in your cash flow plan. You can leave those in big sections, but make sure you know how much you need to spend in each of those categories in order to kind of keep the wheels on in your business. The sum of that should be included in your cash flow plan and broken down by category for your budget. So make sure that your budget is reflecting different categories. You don't have to take it all the way down to like every single expense, but break them down into, make sure at least you're broken down into fixed and marginal expenses, but take those fixed expenses and marginal expenses and break them down into things like labor or product or software or legal expenses, professional expenses, the kinds of things that you would probably see on your tax return. Here are 3 steps to making the budgeting process work for you, okay? Number 1, the budget should be planned on a monthly spend basis. Don't do it week over week like your cash flow plan. Pull a few months' experience as a starting point. Like go back and ask your accountant to see what you spent for the last few months and use that to plan your budget. Now, you want to make sure to watch out for historical spending that might actually not be typical. And on the other hand, if you have less frequently occurring big expenses, make sure to think about them even if you didn't spend them in the last couple of months. You might want to set budget aside monthly for them. Most of those kinds of expenses are the ones that entrepreneurs claim are surprise expenses. They're not really surprises. Like your annual insurance policy is not a surprise. It's got a date. It's actually scheduled. Number 2, check spending weekly, okay? Make sure you're within your budget limits on a weekly basis. Get a report from your accountant to see how much you've spent and how much of that budget category is left. If you've gone over your budget, adjust other budget categories, okay? It still needs to add up. Or worst case scenario, and this should be your worst case scenario, you adjust your sales and marketing plan. 3, at the end of the month, true up the numbers. If you find yourself going over budget in a particular category multiple times, chances are your budget numbers are not realistic. If you're finding that you're having to change or you're seeing changes in spending patterns, like you're spending more in one area or spending less in another area, then you'll need to adjust your budget appropriately as well. Do that assessment at the end of every month. Now, the purpose of a budget is not to micromanage every penny. That's not what it's there for. It's intended to make sure you meet your cash flow plan. So adjust it if it's necessary. The budget is really for your big picture. If you're managing spending on a weekly basis, you're doing a pretty good job, and that way you can make sure that your cash flow plan is actually met. Now, if you find that you're having to sell more a lot in order to cover mid-month expenses, then that should be considered a planning problem. That's a failure in planning. Even if you're actually successful and are able to meet the numbers. I know that's considered like a sales win, but it's considered a planning failure. So adjust your plans. If that's happening a lot, then your spending targets are not appropriate. You have to adjust your sales and marketing plan in advance so you don't have to course correct mid-month. Like I mentioned before, your goal should be that your last month's revenue cover this month's expenses rather than paying for stuff as cash is coming in. All right, that's a budget. Now, you'll notice I didn't discuss profit and loss statements or balance sheets. Now, that's not because these aren't important. Your accountant will likely create these for you. They're pretty standard. Reading them and interpreting them is definitely beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about today. The reason why is because P&L statements and balance sheets are rarely used by CEOs at the level under $1 million in revenue for tactical management. Now, that's not to say they're never used. They have great strategic value if you learn how to read them, or if you get a CFO who learns how to read them, you can actually leverage these for a strategic value. You can kind of think of them as telling you where your ship is on a navigational map. But right now, as a CEO, I believe that a cash flow plan and a budget are your most important tools for tactical planning. The way to think about that is they're actually helping you steer the ship. And that's the thing that's most important right now. Document notes are also in the comment section. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for being with us. Talk to you soon, and best of luck on your financial management. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye. All right, everyone, that's it for today. And two things that you want to do. Number one, if you have not had a chance to join our Facebook group, you need to be able to do that. This is really where we're going to be discussing a lot of this stuff in detail. You can actually, in the Facebook group, get written documentation of the project that we just discussed. So where you want to go to is facebook.com/groups/high ticket program. All together in one word, no breaks, no dashes, high ticket program. So facebook.com/groups/high ticket program. That link is below the video or in the show notes page. If you're out and about listening audio, come on back to click on through and join. Absolutely free. Other thing that we want to offer you is called our 12-week high ticket program Black Book. This is over 60 pages of standard operating procedures for designing, launching, executing your high ticket program. The way you get that is you go to frankbria.com/blackbook. Again, the link is below here for you to grab that. High ticket program is our Facebook group. The Black Book is our free 60-page standard operating manual for how to run a group program. Go get that at frankbria.com/blackbook, and we will see you there. Thanks again so much for being with us today. We're going to have great content again coming up soon. So stick with us for our next episode, and we'll see you soon. All right, everyone, take care. Bye-bye.